Chosen one, pause for a moment. Look around you. Everything may feel ordinary on the outside, but deep within, you know something extraordinary is stirring. There's a restlessness in your spirit, a quiet yearning, an unshakable whisper that says, "This moment is different." And it is. This message didn't find you by accident. It's not just another video to pass the time. It's a divine interruption, a sacred summons from heaven. You were led here by the Spirit, by the timing of God, and by a frequency your soul was already tuned into. Why? Because the season you've been waiting for, the shift you've been praying for, is closer than you think. And this word is your confirmation. Have you ever felt like you were being overlooked, even though you were doing everything right? Like no one saw the battles you silently conquered, the silent nights of tears, the quiet strength you've carried, the faith you held on to while everyone else walked away? If so, let this truth awaken something within you. God saw it all, and now He's responding. Right now, someone with power and position, someone whose name you may not even know yet, has been spiritually assigned to your breakthrough. You don't need to force your way through locked doors anymore. You don't have to beg for what was always meant to be yours. God is not only opening doors, He's sending someone with the keys. And here's what's even more powerful. You won't have to chase them. They are being drawn to you by divine instruction. Your name has been whispered in rooms you've never entered. Your story has been discussed in circles you've never seen. Why? Because your assignment matters, and heaven has decided it's time. Before we go deeper, let me invite you into something sacred. If your spirit feels this frequency, if you know this message was meant for you, type 777 in the comments right now. That number is not random. It's a prophetic code, a sacred confirmation to the heavens that you are in agreement, that you are aligned, and that you are ready to receive what has already been dispatched. Don't be passive with this moment. Engage with it. This is not a performance. This is prophecy unfolding. And to each of you who have supported this channel through Super Thanks, let me speak from the heart. Thank you. You are the reason this message continues to reach those who need it most. Your support is not just appreciated, it is blessed. Heaven records every gift of faith, and I believe a harvest is already being released over your life. Now, I want to ask you something only your spirit can answer. Have you been feeling a strange stillness lately, like God has been quiet, yet your heart knows something is coming? That stillness wasn't absence, it was alignment. God wasn't withholding, He was setting the stage. Because not all breakthroughs come through noise. Some arrive in whispers, in divine meetings, in sudden shifts. So, what if this is the moment everything starts to move? What if right now, even as you listen, something is being rearranged on your behalf? What if the delay you endured wasn't denial, but divine choreography for something greater? What if someone, handpicked by God, is being stirred at this very hour with a divine urge to bless, to elevate, and to unlock the door you've been standing in front of for years? Chosen one, the breakthrough is not future tense. It's present. It's already in motion. And what you're about to hear next will prepare you to recognize it, to receive it, and to walk into it with confidence. Don't miss what comes next. Stay with me, because what is about to be revealed has the power to change the course of your destiny. Now, let's go deeper. The message is calling. Are you ready? God's chosen ones, they're tired of arguing about you. You were never the problem. They claimed to be defending you, but were they ever really? Or were they defending the fragile lie they built around you? one that allowed them to feel innocent while you bore the blame. The truth that most won't dare admit is this: when they whispered your name behind closed doors, when they dissected your actions in group chats or cast judgment across dinner tables, it wasn't out of confusion. Deep down, they already knew who you were, but they weren't ready to confront the version of events that would require them to take responsibility for their silence, their compliance, and their fear. Just as Pilate washed his hands in Matthew 27:24, declaring himself innocent of Jesus' blood, so too did they try to absolve themselves while allowing your character to be crucified. Were they really unsure of who you were, or were they terrified of what admitting the truth might say about themselves? To accept that you were never the problem would have meant confronting their own roles in the drama, the times they stayed quiet when they should have spoken, the red flags they ignored for the sake of comfort, the rumors they repeated without discernment. Why is it that falsehood feels easier to carry than the weight of truth? Proverbs 18:8 says, "The words of a gossip are like choice morsels. They go down to the inmost parts." That sweetness becomes poison when the truth surfaces. And now it is surfacing. People aren't tired of you. They're tired of the weight of their own dishonesty, of holding on to a version of you that no longer makes sense, if it ever did. They panic, not because they still believe the lie, but because they realize how much of their identity was built around maintaining it. How many of them would have to admit they believed wrong, spoke wrongly, judged prematurely? Would they have the courage to repent the way David did in Psalm 51 verse 10, when he cried out, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me"? You didn't have to defend yourself. Your peace became your defense. Your growth began to outshine every accusation. Your life spoke when your lips remained silent. Doesn't it remind you of Daniel? When his enemies couldn't find fault in him, they created one. Yet in Daniel 6, it was his consistency in faith and character that shut the mouths of lions, both literal and metaphorical. Why did they keep discussing you long after you left the room? Why did your name linger like a question no one wanted to answer? Could it be that your light revealed the darkness they were hiding from? Even today, public figures face similar battles. Take Malala Yousafzai, the young Nobel laureate who was vilified simply for seeking education in a culture that resisted change. The attempt to silence her only amplified her voice. The same applies to you. They tried to make you small because your truth was too large for their comfort zones. Your presence was never the problem. It was their need to dissect, to diminish, to distort. And now, as the illusion collapses, they're left with the silence of truth. Not because they've grown wiser, but because they've grown tired. Maintaining the lie has worn them down. Are they willing now to face what they tried so hard to deny? Will they acknowledge that they were wrong, or will they continue to pretend the weight they carry isn't self-inflicted? The moment Judas realized the consequence of betraying Jesus, he returned the silver, but he couldn't undo the damage. Matthew 27:3-5. Is remorse enough when repentance never follows? You were never the problem. The real issue was their fear of facing their own reflection. The truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand still long enough for everything false to fall away. And now, as you walk forward, unbothered, unshaken and unchanged by their past distortions, you embody the words of Romans 8:31. If God is for us, who can be against us? The real drama was never about you. What people projected onto you was only a surface reaction, something to distract from the internal war they were waging with themselves. You were never the battlefield. You were simply the mirror. Can you feel that truth settling in now? All along, the arguments centered around your name, your choices, your presence. But what if none of that was truly about you? What if you were merely a catalyst, something they couldn't define, yet couldn't ignore? The war was never with your actions, but with the reflections you triggered. You stood in authenticity, in calm, in spiritual groundedness, and that unshakable stillness exposed the noise they had spent years hiding behind. This kind of presence is unsettling to those who wear masks. It reminds them of the freedom they've denied themselves. Isn't it often easier for people to turn a mirror into a weapon rather than accept what it reveals? In the Bible, Jesus constantly exposed hidden motives, not by accusation, but simply by being who he was. In Luke 6:7-11, when he healed on the Sabbath, the Pharisees were filled with rage, not because of the act itself, but because it undermined their control. They weren't mad about what Jesus did. They were terrified of what his presence revealed, that their entire structure was built on fear and manipulation. You've likely done the same, just by walking in your truth. People didn't resent you because you were rude, aggressive, or demanding. They resented you because you were unmoved, unshaken, and unbothered by their tactics. You were hard to manipulate, and that alone made them uneasy. Why? Because those who rely on illusion feel threatened in the face of truth. Your presence reminded them of every wound they refused to heal, jealousy they buried, insecurities they dressed up as pride, unresolved shame they masked with ego. Rather than confront those truths, they took the easier path, projecting it all onto you. And when they dumped the weight of their pain on your shoulders, they blamed you for the heaviness. It was never fair, but for them it was easier. What made them so loud? What made them so desperate to paint you as the villain? The answer lies not in who you are, but in what you represented. Your peace made their inner chaos more obvious. Your confidence cast a spotlight on their self-doubt. Your clarity made their confusion uncomfortable, and your mere presence made the masks slip. They hated you for the same reason a shadow hates the light. It cannot survive it. Now, however, the noise is fading. The endless drama, the constant gossip, the emotional gymnastics, they're all losing their energy. People are exhausted, not because of you, but because of the effort it takes to maintain a false version of reality. Isn't that what the Apostle Paul spoke of in 2 Corinthians 13:5? Examine yourselves, whether ye be in the faith, prove your own selves. But instead of self-examination, they spent their energy dissecting you until their strength ran out. Because pretending is tiring. Living in projection is a slow form of internal collapse. You never asked to be the center of their identity crisis. All you did was walk in the truth. But that truth, it was a mirror, and not everyone liked what it reflected. Even in the real world, this dynamic plays out. Brené Brown, a research professor and speaker on shame and vulnerability, once said, "If you're not in the arena getting your ass kicked, I'm not interested in your feedback." Her words strike at the heart of projection. Those who refuse to face themselves are often the loudest critics of those who do. You weren't the fire starter, you were the flashlight. They weren't reacting to your behavior, they were reacting to what your light exposed. That's what stung. That's what turned admiration into envy, curiosity into resentment. But now the smoke is clearing. Slowly, the illusions are burning away. People are starting to realize you were never the source of chaos. They were just blaming the mirror for the reflection. And when the mirror didn't shatter, they had no choice but to sit in the truth it revealed. As it is written in John 3:20, "Everyone who does evil hates the light, and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed. But you, chosen one, are that light." You didn't need to expose anyone intentionally. Truth did that for you. Now the question remains, as the room grows silent and the masks fall away, will they finally face themselves? Or will they search for another mirror to blame? They didn't attack you because you were harmful. They came after you because you didn't flinch. You were steady, You were composed in a world that thrives on emotional outbursts and drama, and that kind of poise, especially when it's genuine, is offensive to those who are ruled by insecurity. Isn't it strange how calmness can threaten chaos more than confrontation? In truth, what they were really doing was weaponizing their own inner wounds. They couldn't bear the silence inside themselves, so they needed someone, anyone, to become the canvas for their projections. And you, chosen one, became that canvas. Not because of anything you did, but because of what you represented. Discipline where they lacked it, authenticity where they performed, strength where they felt fragile. When people can't control you, what do they do next? They try to control the way others perceive you. They start with whispers, then evolve into exaggerations. They take small details and inflate them into character flaws. If they can't break your image through truth, they fabricate one through lies. This tactic isn't new. It was used even against Jesus. In Matthew 26:59-60, the chief priests sought false testimony against Jesus to have him put to death. They couldn't find any real fault, so they created one. Though many false witnesses came forward, they found none, until 2 came forward. Like him, your silence in the face of accusation only further revealed who the real aggressors were. They wanted a reaction from you, a snap, a meltdown, something, anything they could point to and say, "See, they're no better than us," but you didn't give them the satisfaction. Every time you chose peace, you exposed the very chaos they were hoping to hide. Have you noticed how your stillness made their noise echo louder? How your grace under fire caused their masks to slip? They turned their envy into hostility because they didn't know what else to do with it. Your confidence was offensive to their doubt. Your growth reminded them of every time they settled for stagnation, and your strength left them feeling naked. So instead of growing, they blamed you for what they refused to become. Even now, when you remain unbothered, the false stories they built are beginning to crack. The narrative they clung to so desperately is losing its power. And the audience? They're starting to ask real questions. Why does someone need to work so hard to destroy someone who isn't even fighting back? Why is the drama so loud from one side while the other side remains calm? This is the turning point. As Galatians 6:7 reminds us, do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Those who sowed lies, manipulation, and resentment are now reaping the weight of their own exhaustion. They're tired of trying to make people believe something that simply doesn't align with what they see in you. Because people are starting to notice. The drama never started from you, it was always hurled at you. There's a saying from Maya Angelou, a beloved poet and civil rights activist. You may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them. That's what you've done. You didn't fight their fire with fire. You fought it with light, and the absence of your retaliation became your loudest victory. You were built for this, not by mirroring their venom, but by rising above it. You didn't ask for this battle, but your spirit was forged for endurance. Without your reaction to fuel them, the game has grown quiet. The fire they tried to spark around you is dying, not because it wasn't intense, but because it had no substance to sustain it. You were never the one swinging, you were the one standing, and now, with nothing left to provoke, their shadows have no choice but to retreat, and in that silence, the truth speaks loudest. You didn't just walk into the room, you shifted the room. Your very presence disrupted the hierarchy they worked so hard to preserve, not because you demanded attention, but because your energy didn't bow to unspoken rules. You didn't flatter the insecure. You didn't play the politics of power, and you didn't shrink in the presence of people who needed you to feel small in order to feel tall. That's where the friction began, not with anything you said, but with who you are. They were used to being the loudest voice, the center of the circle, the one everyone deferred to. But then you came in, not trying to dominate, not seeking the spotlight, just being real, rooted, confident in your God-given light. And suddenly, those who relied on dominance to feel worthy felt invisible next to someone who simply radiated presence. Do you realize the weight of that? Your quietness made noise, the kind of noise that made artificial power tremble. And in a world addicted to performance, authenticity can feel like rebellion. These people weren't upset because you broke the rules. You broke the illusion that they were ever in charge of anything meaningful. You refused to compete in a game they needed in order to validate themselves. You could have built a better table, yet they were offended you didn't beg for a chair. You became a threat, not because you tried to take their place, but because your existence revealed that they never had a real one to begin with. This echoes the story of David and Saul in 1 Samuel 18. Saul, the anointed king, became jealous when David was praised for his victories. Saul had the title, David had the favor, and no title can compete with divine favor. Scripture says, Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David, but had departed from Saul. Have you noticed how power without purpose becomes insecure in the presence of true anointing? They labeled you arrogant, difficult, aloof, but those were just labels meant to diminish the fact that you wouldn't submit. What they called arrogance was actually clarity. What they called antisocial was actually sovereignty. What they resented was that they couldn't control you because you refused to trade your peace for their approval. They needed you to apologize for being whole, but you never did. You simply stood firm, whole, unmoved, and deeply rooted in your calling. You've likely heard of Frida Kahlo, the renowned Mexican painter. She once said, "I am my own muse. I am the subject I know best." Her bold authenticity challenged traditional standards, and though many labeled her as difficult, it was really her freedom they feared. Like her, you didn't try to steal anyone's spotlight. You created your own canvas, and now people are beginning to see it. They see how those with influence, titles, or platforms responded not with leadership, but with immaturity. They see how those who appeared powerful suddenly crumbled when you didn't play by their script. Why would someone with true authority feel threatened by someone simply being themselves? Your calm disarmed their control. Your independence disrupted their structure. Your refusal to bend to unspoken pressure revealed how fragile their identity really was. They needed hierarchy. You brought harmony, and they couldn't coexist. As Jesus said in Matthew 20:26, "Whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant." But they weren't interested in servanthood. They were addicted to status, and status collapses when stripped of submission. Now the narrative is shifting. People are beginning to rethink everything. They're wondering, was the difficult one really the one who never caused the storm, but simply refused to drown in it? Was the arrogant one actually the one who chose self-respect over flattery? The illusion is falling apart. The ones who clung to control now appear exposed, not commanding but insecure, not confident but shaken. And you? You are being seen not for how loudly you spoke, but for how powerfully you stood. Without playing the game, without begging for validation, you revealed that the truest authority is the kind that doesn't have to prove itself. The one who never asked for power, turns out, had it all along. You didn't wound them, but you reminded them of a wound they never healed from. You walked into the room whole, and that alone was enough to stir the storm. Why? Because you carried the energy of someone who had done the work, deep, painful, necessary work. You had faced your past, made peace with your darkness, and refused to let old pain poison your future. That kind of presence, refined by truth, radiates a strength that cannot be faked. And for many, it's unbearable. What happens when someone sees in you what they're too afraid to face in themselves? What emotions are stirred when your healed energy collides with someone else's buried trauma? They looked at you and didn't just see you. They saw the father who abandoned them, the friend who betrayed them, the person who humiliated them, the pain they never voiced, the rage they never processed, the forgiveness they never offered. And instead of turning inward to deal with the wound, they turned outward and aimed it at you. You became the vessel for their unresolved past. Psalm 34:18 says, "The Lord is close to the broken-hearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." But what happens when broken people reject healing? When they refuse to invite God into their pain? They start to hurt the ones who carry peace, because peace reminds them of what they never found. You didn't provoke them. You simply existed as a mirror, and mirrors are often unwelcome in places where people have been pretending. Your presence didn't speak loudly, but it exposed loudly the anger they stuffed down, the guilt they denied, the fear they numbed for years. Your stillness echoed louder than words, and it made it impossible for them to maintain the fantasy that everything was fine. They lashed out because you unknowingly pulled the curtain back on what they were trying to forget. It's the same kind of misplaced hostility that Joseph's brothers showed him in Genesis 37. Joseph didn't wrong them. He only shared a dream, yet his dream activated something in them: resentment, insecurity, jealousy. They hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. His light made their shadows feel seen, and so they punished him for what he represented, not what he had done. The same is true for you. People began whispering that you were too much, too deep, too different. But was it really about you, or was it about the unhealed pain you unknowingly made visible? Have you ever wondered why their reactions were so exaggerated? Why their words didn't match your actions? You weren't the threat. You were the reminder. You didn't create the wound. They did. But you made it impossible for them to keep pretending it wasn't bleeding, and that terrified them, because truth, especially when it walks into a room silently, forces every hidden thing into the light. This is what John 3:20 explains so well. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed. You didn't shine to expose. You shined because you were free. But even freedom feels like a threat to people who still live in invisible chains. Viola Davis, an award-winning actress and advocate for trauma healing, once shared, "You can either leave something for people or leave something in people. You, chosen one, were never trying to disrupt anything, but your presence left something in them. It stirred the truth, and truth cannot be ignored forever. Now, the fog is lifting. People around them, those who once believed the gossip, are starting to notice the inconsistencies. They're seeing that you didn't start the drama. You just walked in truth. You didn't pull the trigger. They did. But now the bullet of blame is circling back, and the question everyone is quietly asking is this: why was there so much hatred for someone who never raised their voice? You weren't the villain. You were the reveal. And now the room is waking up, not because everyone suddenly found compassion, but because the illusion can no longer hold under the weight of suppressed truth. You didn't start the storm, but you brought the light that made the clouds impossible to ignore. And in this clarity, you are being seen, not as the problem, but as the one who carried peace into the chaos without even knowing how powerful your light truly was. You were never a threat, but you were a reminder, one too powerful to ignore. You didn't enter the room demanding attention. You simply lived with conviction. You spoke with clarity, moved with vision, and made decisions that aligned with your worth. And in doing so, you awakened something in others, not fear of harm, but fear of honesty. Because the moment they looked at you, they were confronted with what they had abandoned: their calling, their fire, their courage. Isn't it amazing how simply being alive, fully, unapologetically, purposefully, can offend those who have settled? You weren't intimidating, but your presence made people uneasy, not because of aggression, but because of authenticity. You didn't follow the script of smallness. You didn't water yourself down to make others feel comfortable. And that unsettled people who had made peace with mediocrity and called it wisdom. They weren't angry at your success. They were uneasy with the light it cast on their resignation. You became living proof that settling isn't survival, it's slow spiritual decay. And while they tried to convince themselves that compromise was the only way, you showed them there was another path. One paved with risk, vision, and faith. One that God honors. As it's written in 2 Timothy 1:7, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." You moved in that power, and it revealed the fear they tried to hide. What if the thing they feared most wasn't your ambition, but their own unlived life? What if their real issue wasn't your courage, but their compromise? Every time you said no to a limited version of life, every time you walked away from a situation that didn't value your soul, every time you chose growth over comfort, you reminded them of the dreams they quietly buried beneath responsibility, fear, and doubt. You didn't threaten their position. You threatened their narrative. That safe equals smart, that less is noble, that dreaming is dangerous. But you kept showing up boldly, walking into spaces no one invited you into, and claiming them like they were already yours. That kind of audacity speaks to heaven, and it confronts every earthly excuse people use to stay small. This is exactly what Caleb embodied in Numbers 13. While others saw giants in the land of Canaan and retreated in fear, Caleb stood and declared, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." His faith didn't just challenge the enemy, it challenged his own people. Because faith exposes fear, even when it's silent. The same happened to you. They labeled you too much, too intense, too driven. But it was never about your drive. It was about what your drive revealed in them. The mirror you held up didn't lie, and mirrors, unlike masks, don't flatter. Even in our generation, people like Malala Yousafzai, Nobel Prize laureate and education activist, refuse to shrink back. She once said, "When the whole world is silent, even one voice becomes powerful." Her bravery exposed the world's complacency, just like your boldness revealed that passivity isn't peace, it's paralysis. You weren't trying to shine brighter than others, you were just refusing to dim. And when others looked at your fire, they remembered their own ashes. But now the illusion is unraveling. The excuses are sounding hollow. And people are beginning to ask, what if I stopped dreaming too soon? What if playing it safe was never safety at all? Romans 12:2 tells us, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." You didn't conform, and your transformation became proof that comfort zones eventually rot, and growth only lives where risk is welcomed. Now people are seeing it clearly. They're tired of blaming your ambition, your authenticity, your fire. They're beginning to see that you weren't the problem, you were the proof. And that truth is becoming harder to deny. You didn't disrupt their peace, you exposed their compromise. And in doing so, you gave others permission to wonder, why did I stop reaching when you never did? They used you, not as a friend, not as a partner in peace, but as an emotional dump site, a place to throw everything they didn't want to deal with. The guilt they refused to admit, the jealousy they tried to hide, the pain they never processed, all of it landed on your shoulders. And because you were strong, because you didn't explode, because you held your peace with dignity, they kept returning to offload more. You were never the cause. You were simply the container. But just because you were able to carry what others threw at you doesn't mean it was ever your responsibility to hold it. You were the one they could count on to remain composed when others spiraled. The one who stayed grounded while others tossed blame like a game of hot potato. But how long can one soul absorb the broken pieces of others before the weight begins to reveal the truth? Even in the Bible, we see this same story unfold in the life of Job. His friends sat with him in silence for 7 days, but when they began to speak, they blamed Job for the suffering he was enduring. Yet Job had done nothing wrong. He was being tested, not punished. Like you, he became the focus of others' discomfort, not because he was flawed, but because it was easier to accuse him than to face the mystery of divine justice. What made you such an easy target? Was it your calm, your refusal to lash out, your ability to carry burdens without crumbling? They mistook your grace for weakness and your patience for permission. But behind the scenes, you were absorbing the emotional wreckage of people who refused to grow. You were the quiet place in a house full of noise, and they took advantage of that silence. Can dysfunction really hide forever? Does truth eventually rise, no matter how deeply it's buried? Toxicity always reveals itself. Like rotting garbage left unattended, it starts to smell. And now, with you gone, the scent has become unbearable. The same people who once said nothing as you were blamed, scapegoated, and criticized are now looking around and realizing the problem never left with you. When you stepped away, the arguments didn't stop, the atmosphere didn't lighten, the tension didn't lift, and people began to notice something was off. Something didn't make sense. If the one they called the problem was no longer there, why was the chaos still raging? Why hadn't peace come? This is what Scripture warns about in Proverbs 26:11. As a dog returns to its vomit, so fools repeat their folly. They repeated patterns, recycled dysfunction, and expected different results. But the cycle only worsened because the one holding the disorder together, you, was no longer present to absorb what they wouldn't confront. Take the story of Diana Nyad, a record-breaking endurance swimmer who finally crossed the 110-mile stretch from Cuba to Florida after 5 failed attempts. She said, "You never know how strong you are until being strong is your only choice." Like her, you never set out to be anyone's hero. You simply endured. You carried what no one else would touch, and that quiet strength became your testimony. Now, the very people who pushed you away are left to face what they tried to avoid. Their projection no longer has a landing place. Their blame has no target. Without you there to take it, the chaos is naked and exposed. Even those who were once blind to the dynamics can now see clearly. The truth is no longer whispered. It's screaming through every broken connection and every unresolved conflict. Isn't it ironic? The ones who claimed your energy was the cause of division are now sitting in the same discomfort they once blamed on you. The difference is, now, they can't pretend it's not theirs. You were never the issue. You were the stabilizer, the buffer, the quiet wall holding back a flood they refused to acknowledge. Isaiah 61:3 promises that God gives beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, and a garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. You carried the heaviness for too long. Now God is lifting it from your shoulders, not to return it to those who gave it, but to burn away the false narratives with holy fire. And now that you're gone, they are left not with peace, but with the pungent smell of their own unresolved pain. It shows in their distance, their frustration, their tension. Not because you brought it, but because you were the only one absorbing it. They didn't attack you because you were wrong. They came after you because you were disruptive to the system they depended on. And not the kind of disruption that brings harm, but the kind that threatens to bring light, change, and truth. You were the one bold enough to speak when silence was rewarded. You asked questions when questions were treated like rebellion. You moved with integrity when deceit had become the standard currency. And that, in a system built on denial and unspoken contracts, made you dangerous. What happens when one person refuses to keep playing their assigned role? When the scapegoat won't take the blame anymore? When the peacekeeper chooses truth over quiet? When the one they labeled difficult starts exposing what's been festering for years beneath the surface? every dysfunctional system, be it a family, a workplace, a church, or a group of friends, doesn't fear disorder. It thrives on controlled chaos. What it fears is clarity. What it dreads is truth. And you carried both. You weren't attacking anyone. You weren't creating conflict. You simply stopped pretending that everything was fine. You refused to normalize the pain. You chose to name the dysfunction. And in a place where honesty feels like betrayal, that made you the threat. But not to a person, to the entire system. This is what happened to the prophets in the Old Testament. Jeremiah was beaten, thrown into a pit, mocked for his warnings, not because he was wrong, but because he challenged the collective delusion of peace when destruction was near. In Jeremiah 6:14, the Lord says, "They dress the wound of my people as though it were not serious." Peace, peace, they say, when there is no peace. You, like Jeremiah, were a mirror to what others didn't want to see. It wasn't your presence that brought discomfort. It was the truth your presence made unavoidable. You didn't disturb the peace. They disturbed themselves trying to silence you. The system you were part of didn't want healing. It wanted survival. And survival meant keeping the roles intact. The golden child had to stay perfect. The scapegoat had to stay blamed. The enablers had to stay quiet. But then came you, and you didn't follow the script. Even in the world of leadership, people like whistleblowers or reformers often face fierce resistance. Take Pope Francis, for instance, head of the Catholic Church, who began challenging long-standing traditions to refocus on humility and justice. His efforts were met with criticism from within, not because he was wrong, but because he was shifting a culture that had grown too comfortable with silence. That's exactly what you did. You shifted the air. You weren't just inconvenient, you were the catalyst, and they couldn't let you keep going. Because if others started listening, if others started seeing what you saw, the whole arrangement would unravel. That's why they worked so hard to distort your image, to convince others that you were the cause of disruption. But here's the irony. The longer you've been gone, the more obvious it becomes that their peace was never real. It was rehearsed. A performance held together by your silence. Now that you're no longer part of it, the cracks are growing, and those who once played along are beginning to notice. Things haven't improved. In fact, they've worsened. The harmony they claimed you ruined has disappeared. The peace they held so tightly has collapsed under its own weight. Without you to blame, the dysfunction has no hiding place. The manipulators are now exposed. The script is no longer working. Even those who refused to listen before are starting to ask, was it ever real? Ephesians 5:11 calls us to this very kind of holy disruption. Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. You did not destroy anything. You revealed what was already broken. You weren't trying to tear it down. You were trying to wake it up. And now the truth can no longer be unspoken. You weren't the problem. You were the shift, the awakening, the one brave enough to say, "This isn't right," when everyone else stayed quiet. The system didn't reject you because you were wrong. It rejected you because you carried the power to heal it, and it wasn't ready to be healed. They are tired, not from you, but from the years they spent exhausting themselves trying to keep lies alive, lies that were never yours to carry in the first place. What started as gossip turned into a full-time emotional performance. Every conversation about you required effort, bending truth, omitting facts, reshaping stories to fit a version that painted them as the righteous and you as the problem. It became a mental game of gymnastics, twisting and turning through half-truths, spinning justifications, and building alliances with anyone who would help keep the illusion afloat. Why did they invest so much in a narrative that drained them? Could it be that it was easier to paint you as the villain than to confront the painful mirror of their own flaws? Could it be that pretending felt safer than healing? Isaiah 5:20 offers a prophetic warning that echoes your experience. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness. They reverse the truth, not because they didn't know better, but because the truth was too inconvenient. And that lie, repeated often enough, became a prison, not for you, but for them. The toll of maintaining deception is rarely obvious at first, but over time, the cracks begin to show. The late nights, the sudden anxiety, the deep unease in their soul, those were the early warnings. Yet they ignored them, determined to hold the narrative together. Like someone running on a treadmill set too fast, they gave everything and got nowhere. The only reward was exhaustion. You were never the one draining them. Their refusal to face truth is what did it. Just like King Saul, who became consumed with chasing David instead of dealing with his own disobedience. 1 Samuel 18-24. They tiny basasasivan tiu. You as a distraction. But in the end, Saul fell on his own sword. His battle was never really with David, it was with himself. Some people choose control over peace. And to control the narrative about you, they were willing to partner with dishonesty, even toxicity. As long as someone would help validate their illusion, they welcomed them, no matter how false their allegiance was. The truth didn't matter, the story did. But what they never expected was how heavy the story would become. That's what's catching up now. The lies they once told with ease now sit like stones on their chest. The cost of twisting your name has become a weight they can't carry quietly anymore. Their joy has been eroded, their conscience weakened, and their spirit fatigued. What once felt like power, being able to control how others saw you, has now become a curse that keeps them bound to a false version of reality. Even today, we see this happen. The renowned author and speaker Ian Van Zandt once said, "When you tell the truth, your story changes. When your story changes, your life changes." But to change their life, they would have had to change the story. And that required admitting you were never the enemy. Now that time has passed, they're starting to see it. The narrative hasn't aged well. It didn't protect them. It didn't bring peace. It only wore them down. Their battle was never truly with you. It was with their unwillingness to face their own reflection. And that truth, now rising to the surface, is the loudest confession of all. Why didn't they stop sooner? Why didn't they let go before the damage was done? Because holding on to the lie gave them a false sense of control. But now, the very lies they used to protect themselves have become the chains that bind them. And in that exhaustion, there is finally an opportunity, an invitation to freedom. John 8:32 reminds us, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." But freedom only comes when we're willing to stop dragging others through the mud to feel better about our own reflection. And now they're realizing the war they fought was never needed. The enemy they imagined was never real. The truth was always standing right in front of them, and the peace they wanted was on the other side of admitting it. You disrupted something most people didn't even realize they were enslaved to, the emotional economy. You entered rooms where connection had a price tag, where every interaction was measured and affection was rationed according to hidden agendas. People traded validation like currency. They kept emotional ledgers, tracked who gave what and who owed whom. But you brought a different kind of presence, one that didn't fit their system. You gave without keeping score. You listened without angling for influence. You offered kindness not as strategy, but as your default state of being. And that confused them. It exposed them. They weren't uncomfortable because you were weak. They were uncomfortable because you were free. In a world where people use generosity as leverage, your unconditional spirit disrupted the norm. You weren't there to climb ladders or collect favors. You were there to be light, to love, to serve. Not because you needed applause, but because that's who God created you to be. And in spaces where power is gained through transaction, Your abundance looked radical. This same kind of disruption can be found in the early church. In Acts 4:32-35, believers shared everything they had, and there was no needy person among them. It was generosity that shocked the world, not wealth. Their giving wasn't calculated. It was spirit-led, just like you. And just like then, systems built on manipulation always fear that kind of divine abundance. People who rely on control are unsettled by those who cannot be bought. They need everything to be a deal. They thrive when kindness has strings and love has limits. But your refusal to play their game made the whole table shake. You weren't hustling for influence. You weren't angling for approval. You were simply showing up with grace, and that kind of purity was threatening. Why does freedom terrify those who operate in fear? Why does selfless love make the room so uncomfortable? Could it be that your way of giving revealed how deeply transactional others have become? Take Mother Teresa as an example, founder of the Missionaries of Charity. She served the sick and dying without asking anything in return. She became a global icon, not through shouting, but through silent, steady sacrifice. She once said, "Not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love." That's the spirit you carry. You may not realize it, but your presence is revolutionary in a culture addicted to earning and owing. They couldn't control you because you didn't want anything from them, and in their world, that's powerlessness. Your quiet generosity, given without needing to take, became a spotlight that exposed the emotional hustlers for what they were. People trading attention for control, compliments for loyalty, intimacy for influence. You didn't threaten their position, you threatened their illusion. And when people couldn't outgive you, they tried to outlabel you. Too intense, too generous, too spiritual, too much. But what they were really saying was, "You make me see myself." Your strength forced their insecurity to the surface. 1 John 4:18 says, "Perfect love drives out fear, and your kind of love, steady, fearless, unapologetically whole, became the floodlight to every shadow they tried to hide behind." That's why they talked. That's why they tried to discredit you. Not because you lacked value, but because you carried something they didn't understand, wealth of spirit. Now, people are beginning to notice. The ones who kept emotional ledgers are coming up bankrupt, and the one they tried to dismiss, you, continues to overflow. You are not here to compete in their games. You're here to rebuild what their power plays have broken. You are not transactional, you are transformational. Because true wealth can't be faked, and the kind of abundance you walk in, it can only come from God. They turned your life into a circus, not because you were chaotic, but because you were calm. They couldn't match your stillness, your peace, your refusal to be dragged into unnecessary arguments, your ability to stay grounded while they spiraled. That's what disturbed them. You didn't react the way they expected. You didn't shout back. You didn't join the scramble for attention. You didn't even flinch. And that was the real threat. In a world where people feed on reactions, your silence became a mirror they couldn't stand to face. So what did they do? They created noise. They lit fires of rumor, inflated tiny misunderstandings into full-blown drama, and built a stage where you were cast as the villain simply because you wouldn't play the role they assigned. The louder they got, the quieter you became, and that contrast was undeniable. Have you ever wondered why calmness provokes chaos? Why does stillness seem to incite so much noise? Could it be that when you don't feed the spectacle, those addicted to drama panic? This same dynamic played out in the life of Jesus. In Matthew 27:14, as he stood before Pilate and a crowd filled with false accusations and stirred up rage, Jesus gave him no answer, not even to a single charge. His silence wasn't weakness, it was authority. He didn't need to prove himself because truth doesn't perform. You did the same. You didn't react because you had already mastered what they were still trying to manipulate: presence. You knew that real power doesn't need to shout, and your stillness revealed the emptiness of their theatrics. You didn't respond to their chaos because the storm wasn't yours. You were the calm in the eye of it. They tried everything to shake you: shade, gossip, manufactured outrage, even turning others against you. But none of it worked. Why? Because their circus needed your participation to survive, and you chose not to show up. Your refusal to perform made their performance collapse. The spotlight they forced on you only illuminated their own insecurity. And now, people are beginning to notice. Even in modern times, we've seen individuals hold still in the face of storms. Nelson Mandela, after 27 years in prison, emerged not with bitterness but with unshakable peace. His stillness disrupted an entire system of hate. He once said, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." Like him, you disrupted not with protest, but with poise. The audience is walking away now. They're tired of the act. They've seen enough. And the more they watch you, the more they realize the drama never started with you. You didn't throw matches. You didn't fan flames. You simply refused to burn. Psalm 46:10 whispers truth into this moment. Be still and know that I am God. You've been still, and it's that stillness that has exposed the show for what it really was: a desperate attempt to unseat someone who wouldn't be moved. Now the performers are losing momentum. Their energy is fading. Their tactics are unraveling. Why? Because truth doesn't require an audience, and you no longer need to explain your piece. Your presence has spoken volumes. You were never the chaos. You were the silence they couldn't shake, the strength they couldn't understand, the consistency that revealed every inconsistency around you. And now, the loudest thing in the room is not their noise, it's your stillness. You didn't need to pretend. You didn't wear a mask. You didn't craft an image or rehearse a role. You simply showed up as yourself, unfiltered, honest, whole, and that very authenticity, that natural integrity, became the light that exposed what others were working so hard to hide. You weren't trying to outshine anyone. You were just being. But when someone is real in a room full of performances, the spotlight shifts whether they want it to or not. You didn't claim to have it all figured out. You didn't decorate your struggles or polish your imperfections. You simply walked in truth. And that made them deeply uncomfortable, not because you threatened them, but because you reminded them of the selves they abandoned to be accepted. What happens when your authenticity exposes the hollowness of other people's personas? When your transparency reveals just how scripted their smiles have become? Some people can't handle that mirror, and instead of facing it, they attack it. This is why they tried to make you the problem. It wasn't your truth that hurt them. It was what your truth revealed about their lie. They called you too intense, too emotional, too raw. But what they meant was, you make me feel fake. Rather than admit that they've been living behind curated identities, they projected blame onto you. Because keeping the performance alive was easier than stepping into realness. The Pharisees did the same to Jesus. In Matthew 23, he didn't accuse them of lack of religion. He exposed the performance of it. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead. Your presence has had the same effect. You didn't come to condemn, you simply lived in truth. And that truth was too loud for those trying to hide. You weren't interested in playing the game. You didn't care for approval points. You didn't buy into the social currency of pretending to be what you're not. But in a world obsessed with perfection, authenticity looks like rebellion. Take Keanu Reeves, for example, a Hollywood actor known for his humility and quiet presence. He doesn't show off, doesn't chase the spotlight. His kindness is genuine. He's often called the most grounded man in Hollywood. Why? because his authenticity stands out in an industry built on performance. Like you, his simplicity shines brighter than any scripted act. Now, the curtain is falling, and people are starting to notice the difference between what is rehearsed and what is real. The same ones who once bought into the act are craving something they can trust. They're growing weary of shallow interactions and empty praise, and your presence, your realness, is like a breath of fresh air. Isn't it interesting how the one who refuses to pretend becomes both the most loved and the most misunderstood? Why does authenticity attract both admiration and resistance? Could it be that truth is disruptive by nature? Your authenticity was never the issue. It was the truth they weren't ready to face. You didn't expose them by accusing. You exposed them by existing. And as the stage falls apart, more and more people are quietly stepping toward the light. Not the spotlight, but the steady, grounded truth you carry. John 3:21 says, "But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light, so that it may be seen plainly that what they have done has been done in the sight of God." You have lived by the truth. And now the lights are shifting. The audience is turning, not to the loudest performance, but to the quietest presence. Because in the end, it's not the act that survives, it's the truth. And your authenticity is the truth that's shaking the entire stage. They called it proof, paraded it like evidence, held it up like a trophy of righteousness. But it was never truth. It was gossip, just gossip, dressed in a suit and tie, made to look convincing, made to sound like justice. They repeated it with authority, cloaked it in urgency, but all it ever was empty words wrapped in manipulation. And you were the target. Not because you did something wrong, but because their insecurities needed a direction, and their pride needed protection. What made their stories so powerful wasn't their truth, it was their presentation. In a world that prefers drama over discernment, gossip can be weaponized as gospel. But where was the evidence? Where were the facts? What court did they present this to, other than the echo chambers of their own fears? Doesn't it seem strange that so many people are quick to believe a lie that makes them feel safe, rather than a truth that requires courage? This is not a new tactic. In John 18, Jesus stood before Pilate as the crowd cried, "Crucify him." They offered no real proof, only stirred emotions, false accusations, and manipulated fear. Pilate, finding no guilt in him, still gave in to the noise, because sometimes it's not truth that wins, it's pressure, but the pressure always breaks. The stories they told about you were never about clarity, they were about control. The so-called proof was just emotional blackmail, used to control the narrative and force others to fall in line. Many didn't question it, not because they were convinced, but because questioning meant risking exile from the group. It was safer to hate you than to stand beside you. And now, as the dust settles, the holes in the narrative are gaping. The facts don't add up. The timeline is blurry, the details shift, and those who were so quick to accuse are starting to look around and realize they didn't have proof. They had hearsay, they had assumptions, they had their own discomforts projected onto your name. Even today, public figures face the same dilemma, maligned by rumors, destroyed by unverified claims. Consider Brandon Sanderson, a best-selling fantasy author who faced harsh criticism from media outlets about his personal character. But instead of reacting with outrage, he responded with clarity, humility, and transparency. His truth, calm and consistent, slowly unraveled the weight of those accusations. Why? Because truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to stand. Your stillness has done the same. Without lashing out, without defending every attack, you've allowed time to become your witness. And now, the ones who clung to their proof are waking up. They're realizing that their trust was hijacked, that what they believed about you didn't just harm you, it fractured their own understanding of reality. Their loyalty to the lie has left them disconnected from truth and disillusioned with themselves. Psalm 101 verse 5 speaks to this moment clearly. Whoever slanders their neighbor in secret, I will put to silence. The Lord sees beyond appearance, beyond noise, beyond the spin, and his justice always reveals what's been hidden. Now the mask is slipping. The once convincing stories feel hollow. The weight of maintaining false narratives is proving too much to carry. Those who helped spread the rumors are facing the shame of realizing they were never warriors for truth. They were pawns in a scheme built on fear and image. And what hurts them most isn't that they misjudged you, it's that they stopped recognizing themselves in the process. They lost sight of who they were while trying to distort who you were. The proof that once felt empowering now feels like chains. A constant reminder that their alliance with the lie cost them more than they imagined. But the truth is finally shining through. You never needed to defend yourself. The collapse of the false narrative is doing that for you, and the people who once turned their backs are now seeing that you weren't the one out of place. You were the one anchored in reality all along. You didn't lose. No matter how hard they tried to twist the story, no matter how loudly they repeated it, no matter how many agreed, you never lost. What they called defeat was actually revelation. The chaos that surrounded you wasn't your fault. It wasn't born from your actions. It was the festering rot that had been hiding for years beneath their carefully polished surfaces. You didn't create the cracks. You simply made them impossible to ignore. Your presence became the fault line, the very thing they feared most. You showed up with clarity, with stillness, with truth, and that was enough to make everything built on deception tremble. Have you noticed how uncomfortable people get when their lies are finally forced into the light? When their illusions start to unravel? It wasn't your fault that the mask slipped. It was your courage that revealed it. Like the prophet Nathan standing before King David in 2 Samuel 12, you didn't attack. You simply held up the truth, and the weight of that truth was enough to break the illusion. You weren't fighting them. You were revealing what they tried to hide. That's why they worked so hard to discredit you, because the truth you carried threatened the control they clung to. But here's what matters. You never absorbed their rot. You didn't internalize the sickness. You refused to wear the blame they tried to sew onto your name. And that refusal, quiet, strong, unshakable, shattered the entire structure of deception they built around you. That strength, it was divine. It was God in you. It was purpose unfolding. Even in modern history, we've seen this kind of disruption. Consider whistleblower Erin Brockovich, a legal clerk without formal law training who exposed one of the largest environmental scandals in America. Her voice, dismissed and resisted, eventually uncovered corruption hidden beneath polished professionalism. Her persistence didn't just change systems, it forced a reckoning. Like you, she didn't break the system. She revealed the sickness within it. Now the people who once stood against you are exhausted, not because of you, but because of the energy it took to protect the lie. The emotional labor they poured into covering up the truth has finally become too much. They're weary of the blame games, the silent alliances, the unspoken guilt. Their fatigue is not just physical, it's spiritual. The truth, long buried, is clawing its way to the surface. Galatians 6:7 declares, "Do not be deceived, God is not mocked. A man reaps what he sows, and what was sown in darkness is now being harvested in daylight." Your endurance has exposed the shallow soil they planted in, and now they're reaping the fruits of their denial. You didn't just survive the false accusations, you overcame them. You became the mirror that reflected everything they tried not to see. The chaos wasn't your storm. You were the lighthouse, and that light continues to shine through the wreckage. Yes, the journey was lonely. There were moments when you questioned your strength, but now those questions are giving way to revelation. You were never meant to carry their weight, and now that it's falling away, Freedom is nearer than it has ever been. Healing is closer than they imagined possible. Can you see it? The tide is turning. People are waking up. The silence is breaking. And your truth, once mocked and resisted, is now being recognized. Those who labeled you the problem are now wrestling with their own conscience. Their accusations, once loud and certain, now echo back at them with uncomfortable clarity. Your story is not a warning. It's a blueprint, a map for others to follow as they too begin to awaken, to step out of denial, to release the burdens never meant for them. What you carried, what you exposed, what you endured, it was never failure. It was transformation. You didn't lose. You led a quiet revolution. You are not the broken one. You are the revelation, the one who held steady when everything tried to collapse around you. And now, as the truth spreads like morning light across the shadows, your journey becomes something sacred, a living testimony of what it means to walk in purpose, even when no one claps. Isaiah 60 verse 1 speaks directly to you in this season. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. The world may have tried to dim your fire, but you were born to blaze, not as a spark, but as a beacon. You are not the problem. You are the awakening. And freedom, real freedom, the kind that cannot be manipulated, is already unfolding beneath your feet. You didn't just go through this. You rose through it. What they tried to use against you only revealed who you truly are. You were never the problem. You were the truth they couldn't hide from, the light they couldn't dim, the stillness they couldn't shake. Every moment of silence you endured, every false accusation, every rumor meant to bury you, it all served one purpose: to prove what God already knew about you. You are chosen, you are anointed, you are called for something greater. This entire journey wasn't meant to destroy you. It was meant to expose everything that didn't belong around you. What they meant for harm, heaven used for refinement. The rejection revealed your authority. The isolation birthed your clarity. And now you rise. To everyone watching this, thank you for standing in truth. To those who've supported with a super thanks, your kindness speaks volumes. We honor and appreciate you deeply. Whether through a gift, a share, or simply by staying until the end, you are part of something powerful. If this message has stirred your spirit, comment 777 to declare that your divine completion and awakening has begun. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that their light is not too much. It's exactly what the world needs. And remember, this isn't the end of the story. This is the awakening of your real one. The next chapter begins now. Until we meet again, stay grounded in truth, stay fearless in your light, and never forget, you were born to break the illusion.